celebrating the new year with holiday beer and wine, next on Village in Motion. Well, here we are. It's December 26th, day after Christmas. I hope you all had an enjoyable Christmas, and the weather's holding up for us. I hope to continue this year. And we start out here with Jim Coulter again on our wine program, and we are also going to have Bert Allman.
Hello.
Will join us today for our little show talking about holiday wine, and we're going to sort of Jim, let's start with you. It just seems to me that this year there's more of a push on stressing holiday wines. And when we talk about holiday wines, and Bert, you chime in, what do we really mean?
Well,
I mean, what's special? Yeah. Is there a different Chardonnay, for example? Or
no, I think Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Cabernet, they're all still the same. But I think what I've noticed this year, especially, is a lot of fruit is being added to wines. You know, have a Cabernet Sauvignon with raspberry juice in it, or a Sauvignon Blanc with grapefruit juice added. I don't remember seeing too much of that in what is being marketed as serious wines in the past. They've always had wine coolers and so forth. But now it seems like they're doing more of that. But when you say holiday wines, the two things that come to mind, first of all, is champagne. This time of year between Thanksgiving and New Year's, you always see ads in the newspaper for French champagne and for California sparkling wine. They're always being pushed harder at this time of year. The other things that get sold a lot are liquors. You'll see high-end liquor, brandy, cognac, things like that get advertised a lot this time of year, mainly for gift giving. People that want to give their boss a nice bottle of something. So those are more what I think of, the staples for dinner wines and so forth. You probably see more advertisements now for more expensive ones. You see Chateau Lafite Rothschild being advertised for $1,500 a bottle or something, where you don't see people advertising that the rest of the year. But for the most part, I think the wines, and Bert may know more about the beers for holidays. There may be a special push on for that.
Well, you know what's really interesting is that it's very, very parallel in the beer world, is that this time of year, starting in Thanksgiving, you're seeing a lot of pumpkin ales. You're seeing a lot of the lambricks, which is raspberry.
What is a pumpkin ale actually? Do they actually use
pumpkin
as
flavor?
A source of
Beer takes on flavors very, very well, and so does wine. But normally, wine is considered a pure grape beverage, and they're not, unless, like he says, the fruit wines or the sparkling, for lack of a better term, kiddie wines that they've marketed to, the young people that haven't developed a taste for really fine wines yet. But in the beer world, it also shifts not only from the regular plain beers to the fruity beers, and it also goes from the lighter beers in the summertime to the much heavier beers in the wintertime. And a lot of the heavier beers take on a lot of flavors because they have natural flavors in them too that will remind you of chocolate and coffee and cherry and that kind of stuff. So it does go to the heavier side and the fruitier side.
Bert, is the alcohol content any different on these different wines or beers when they have the flavors in them?
That's a really interesting question, Eck, because if they do it during the fermenting process, and if you're adding sugar, you're adding higher original gravity, which means you have higher alcohol potential. And if you add the right yeast, which will live in a higher alcohol environment, it'll keep producing alcohol until it gets up to the in terms of beer up until the 11, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12%.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you can buy some very, very big beers nowadays, and in terms of wine, you can get up to fortified wines and up in the 18%, 19%.
Really, that much?
Yeah,
Yep.
and brandy and sherry and,
Yeah.
And the ports,
things like that.
yeah, yep.
Yeah, that's right. When did, hopping around a little bit, now you guys pop in as sort of a free program here. When did champagne, when did champagne become associated with special events? Does that go way back when?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I suspect.
And
yeah.
why? I mean, why
Well,
would it be?
I can tell you why. What I think it is, because I read up on this a couple of years ago, and I'm not sure my short-term memory is as good as it used to be. But
Well, I'll tell you it isn't, so go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, and hi, I'm Bert.
my recollection is that this came after World War I, when the French champagne houses had a lot of stock on hand that they had laid down before the war, and in 1914, before that northern part of France got overrun, because during most of the war the fighting was going on through the Champagne region. So there were stocks of wine that were cellared and stuck away, and when the 1920s got here, the Roaring 20s, the French had a lot of wine, especially, and champagne to sell, and they started marketing that as a big thing for New Year's celebrations. And so, and of course, New Year's celebrations go back to the Roman times. I mean, there have been parties to celebrate the change of seasons and the change of years forever. But I think the champagne, if my recollection is correct, and if not, somebody will stop me in the hall later today and tell me. But I think it came about after World War I was when the big marketing push came, and of course the Roaring 20s and Prohibition and everything kind of fed into that whole thing.
Yeah. Bert, anything to add?
He just did a great
Pretty
job.
accurate, yeah. How about beer now? Give us go back a little history of beer, when beer first started, and now we've got all these specialties where we're talking about holiday beers and what have you. When did that all evolve? Roughly,
Roughly about 5.
See, when I grew up, all I knew was there was a draft beer and just a few simple things. And now you've got all these things you've talked about before.
Yeah, I believe it started in 5,366 BC. I think it was a Sunday that they were cleaning out the cesspool behind a bakery, and there was the beer. Well, it's a very natural process, and beer has become a staple, not only as almost like a food source throughout Europe, and it spread all the way across the world. And when you can make something that people consume, you're going to find somebody in the crowd that's going to be proud of theirs. Well, that starts a natural competitive cycle, and the product gets better and better and better. So, and the same thing happened in wine and in France and in all over the world. People are very proud of this process. So, and then of course, during Prohibition, again, it was illegal in this country, so that closed down a lot of the small mom and pop breweries. When it was opened back up again, only the strong survived, and there were a lot. And then even the stronger ones kept eating the smaller fish, which were eating the smaller fish, which were eating the smaller fish. So it really got concentrated and condensed in the, 60s and 70s, I guess, when you got down to the Pabst and the Millers and the Budweisers and the Rolling Rocks, and there was only probably a couple handfuls. Well, that became unacceptable because they kept mass marketing to the lowest common denominator, and beer became, alcohol water with bubbles in it, basically. And I know I'm being, kind of prejudiced.
No, I understand.
And so then again, the people got involved again, and people started brewing small batches in their basement and whatever, and they started sharing, and then they became proud of it, and it kept getting better and better, and then they applied for licenses, and the business of brewing caught on, and the state started collecting more taxes and blah, 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 so that all of a sudden the industry
There seem to be more and more small brewers. I mean, you go along just in our general area here. they've popped up.
Yeah, and my theory is that it's about reached its apex, to tell you the truth. It has gotten so many different beers and wines and everything out there that at some point I think it's going to contract a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jim.
Yeah. The one thing that Bert touched on reminded me that back in the olden times, before you were born even,
Oh, really?
beer and wine were two products that were safe to drink.
Mm-hmm.
Drinking water in the Middle Ages was often polluted with dead animals and dead people floating around it. But beer and wine being fermented had alcohol in it, and it was safe. It was safe to drink, which is why the church got involved. You had your Trappist ales, and your monks were making beer and champagne. So there was a public health aspect to being able to drink beer or wine with your meal. The meat may be rancid and kill you, but at least the beer and the wine
beer and
was
wine
good.
weren't going to.
Yeah.
The other thing was that the federal government, in writing their alcohol laws, gave people an exemption to make, I think it's 200 gallons or 100 gallons, whatever, wine or beer at home, which is, Phil Frankie could talk more about that if he were here today, because he's one of the guys that takes advantage of that, where you can make it without having to have a license to make your own beer or wine. And a lot of beer and wine makers got started at home experimenting with it, and they found out they had a talent for it. They liked what they did, and that's how they started to get into the business. That's why so many. Now we probably have more breweries in the United States now than we did in the 1920s.
It's a very simple process fermenting. I was down in Manassas recently at a beer supply store, and they had a poster up on the wall that have you ever tried hard cider, or to make hard cider? So the guy sold me a couple small packets of champagne yeast, and he says just go get a nice pasteurized, unfiltered apple cider, take it out of the plastic container, put it into your carboy, and that is where you mix the yeast and the sugar liquid, and allows it to ferment, and it allows for the CO2 to escape so it doesn't blow up. And within 6 weeks, I had an apple wine that was actually very drinkable.
Really?
And that was it. That was my total time commitment until I bottled it. And then, of course, you have to purify the bottles, and you have to put it in the bottles, and you have to cap it, and so on and so forth. But it's a very easy process as long as it's a clean process. As long as you don't kill the yeast with bacteria, it's a very easy process. Yeast is in the air right now. There are yeast spores probably floating around here right now, and as they get into a liquid that has sugar in it, they start eating the sugar, they start producing carbon dioxide and alcohol. Very easy process.
Bert, let me ask you, in the general restaurant business, and you've been in the food business, have you noticed any increase in the buying of beers versus wines? It seems like, for a while there that when you went to a restaurant, you didn't order a beer, you ordered wine. But now it seems to me, some of my observations, you see more beer consumed than I used to see.
Well,
is that true or not?
Well, and I'm going to answer that kind of philosophically. I hope people are ordering what their taste buds are asking them to order, and what they anticipate to match it up with what they're eating. So I hope that people, if they want to consume wine or beer, that's what they choose.
Yeah.
And they should get something that they want. I don't normally drink wine. I normally do drink beer. But if somebody has a really fabulous bottle of wine that they want me to taste, I'll have a glass of wine, and it'll go good with dinner. And if a friend comes over who's normally a wine drinker and I have a special beer for him, it really should be about what you want. And the market is just supplying you with choice.
Yeah.
I don't think people are switching back and forth and becoming diehard beer drinkers when they used to be wine drinkers, or vice versa. I think there's just more variety and more choice out there.
Yeah. And I think another thing is that with the expansion of the number of breweries in this country, there's been a real push to market beers, both regionally and nationally. I mean, now you can go to a place like Total Beverage over here and have your choice of hundreds of different kinds of beers to buy. I know there's restaurants like Church Key down in D.C. that are pretty much a beer-centric restaurant, where most places you walk in, they have a wine list. You go into a beer restaurant, and they have a beer list there where you can order beers from around the world. So I think there's more of an emphasis on marketing beer, which is probably one reason why you're noticing, A, that people are ordering it, and B, that people are ordering it because it's being marketed.
And it's more visible.
Yeah.
Because now you're seeing, rather than 1 or 2 taps in a bar, you're seeing 10 or 15 taps in a bar, or 20 or 30.
No, I personally, I felt I've seen a change in my lifetime where at dinner you see more people drinking beer than you used to.
Well, and there's another change coming.
What's that?
Now that the states have opened up fermenting, and you can produce large batches of a fermented alcohol, most of the people are producing beer. But now they're going back to the states and saying, well, wait a minute, you told me I can brew beer or ferment beer. Why can't I ferment wine? So some of these beer houses now are going to apple wines, basically like I did. Yeah. And so they're expanding their licenses. So now they found a process which is actually a little bit easier than beer. And you're seeing a marketing of what's called the hard ciders or the apple wines, or the sours. There's a category called sours too. And you're going to see that those are going to start. Are people really going to start drinking that?
When you say sours, what do you mean?
That is a type of beer. It's not brewed to the level that a really good ale is brewed to. So it has a very sour, almost appley taste to it. It's technically a beer, but it's kind of like a distant cousin of apple wine and beer kind of mixed together. So you're going to see all these fermented beverages being marketed very shortly.
Yeah, that's amazing. How well does beer store? In other words, do you have to be concerned about a can of beer being 2 or 3 years old? I think we discussed this a few years ago, you and I, but I forgot what your answer was.
Well, unfortunately, I'm going to put my dining services director's hat on and say, if you ever pick up a can of beer and it feels fatter than normal, or if you look at the natural processing creases in the cans and there's outward indentation, a bump, or if there's any deformation in the normal look of the can, throw it away immediately.
Really?
Don't.
What causes that?
Basically, and I could be wrong here, but it'd be botulism, which is deadly.
Really? Yeah, sure.
Yeah. But wine, of course, is known, especially red wine. You need to lay that down for a certain number of years before you even try to drink it. And a really, really well-made red wine will continue to mature and deepen and improve over years. They're saying that some beers will do that. I'm not sure. I think the flavor might change, whether it actually gets better or not. I don't know about that.
And I think there's also a difference, and Bert can correct me if I'm wrong, between the mass-produced beers like Miller and Budweiser, which have stabilizers and so forth added, and those and those will probably last if you store them properly, in cool, darkly. 5-year-old bottle of beer probably will still taste fine if it hasn't been in the sunlight. Craft brewed beers or beers that you make yourself don't have those chemical stabilizers in them. They're probably 6 months or 8 months after you
until they start to change. I bottle condition my beers, which means the last fermentation is actually taking place in the bottle, and there is sediment in the bottom of the bottle. Well, as long as there's particulate in the bottle and there's ingredients in that bottle, the flavor is going to change, and that's where it comes a quality taste. Is it going to change for the better or for the worse in 6 months? Beer is a fresh product. I mean, if it's been oak aged, or if it has oak or wood product in it, it may get better. But
what is the difference in I guess my question, what is the difference in taste when you have a draft Miller Lite, let's say, versus a bottle Miller Lite?
I don't drink Miller Lite.
Well, I don't either. But if I did, I'd drink a draft.
Probably a bad example.
That's a real cop out answer.
Yeah. Well, you know, Miller's. I mean,
What's the difference in any beer versus a Bud Light draft versus a Bud Light in a bottle?
Jim, you want to tackle that one?
A part of it could be the old marketing perception thing, and probably the Budweiser or the Miller salesman who's here would probably tell you that there is no difference, that they use exactly the same beer. For me, beer always tastes better if I'm having a draft beer. For some reason, to me, that tastes better. Now, maybe it's because if the guy that's pouring the draft knows what he's doing, he pours it down the glass and tilts the glass so that it gets just the right amount of head and so forth, as opposed to me just swilling it down right out of the bottle. But to me, draft beer, now that could all just be my mental perception. We've done tests like this with wine where you have 3 bottles of red wine and you have people taste them and you tell them this one's 5, this one's 10, and this one's 15, and they all think the $15 one tastes best. And then you open them and they're all exactly the same wine. So that part of that could be.
But you're saying to you the draft beer tastes.
I think it tastes
different, better. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I do
but
too.
it's probably a prejudice on our part.
Yeah.
No, we have more sophisticated palates.
That's now we can drink draft beer faster.
yeah, right.
And you can actually, there probably is a real difference, and that is if you do pour a beer into a glass, you can smell it. So you have two senses going after the beer at one time rather than drinking out of the bottle.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
You could put a bottle beer into a glass too. So.
And I'll tell you one other thing too that I just thought of. If you're drinking a draft beer, for the most part, it's been stored in a large container. If you're drinking a bottle, it's coming out of a small container. They've done tests with wine that shows if you have a 5-liter bottle of wine, it ages more slowly and so than a 750 milliliter bottle, which is why most of the wineries will make big bottles of wine and they'll put them down in their cellar for 50 years or 100 years and still have them coming out taste good. So it could be the same with beer, where a larger container is, whatever chemical process happens more slowly in a large container than it does in the small one. But most beer that's being sold is like wine nowadays, is being sold to be drunk within a week or two of the time you buy it. I'm not sure that the size of the container makes much difference.
Well, staying on wine, when you buy a box of wine that's in a box now, what's the difference between that if I buy the same, let's say a Cabernet, and if I buy it in a glass jug? Is there any difference?
No.
Or does it store better?
If you're not going to drink the bottle of wine the same in one night.
Well, I'm talking about a big jug, glass jug.
But the box is always a better deal because of the way box wines work, and it's got a bladder inside the box. That air pressure collapses the bladder as you take wine out so that no air gets inside to the wine. If you have a bottle of wine and you pour it, then air gets in while you're pouring the wine.
And that's no good for wine.
It's not good over time. For dinner, it's probably better when you get a little air in with the wine, help mix it up a little bit, aerate the wine a little bit. But the box you can keep for 4 or 5 months in your refrigerator or just sitting on your counter if it's red wine. And the wine will taste just as good at the end of that time as when you open the box. Bottle after 2 days or more is going to start to go downhill.
Yeah.
And boxes are a better deal.
And for beer, they were in the habit of using these large kegs, which I believe are 15 gallons.
Yeah.
And so when the craft beer started coming along and they started putting them in these large kegs, people were asking, are you using nitrogen rather than carbon dioxide to pump the beer out of the kegs to get rid of that oxygen, factor out of it, because those big craft beers would not sell an entire keg for, weeks and weeks and weeks sometimes. And it would go stale, it would rancid, blah, 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 blah. So a lot of these places went to using nitrogen, which would stop that possibility because there's no oxygen in it. But now the craft breweries have gone to these really, really small kegs. that are, 3.5, I think they're 3.5 gallon kegs. They look like the old soda canisters.
Yeah, and I guess you actually buy them over at Total Wine. You bring that home, right?
Yeah, and that's 3.5 gallons. If you have 6 or 7 guys sitting around watching a ball game, you can drink that many, and so you don't need to worry about the nitrogen and the oxygen.
Yeah.
But oxygen and alcoholic beverages is normally not a good idea. But does it harm distilled alcohols too? I've never heard of anybody that worries about their bourbon going bad in a bottle.
But again, I would suspect, I've done that. I mean, when we moved in, I got a bottle of bourbon for a housewarming party, and I think I've still got at home half a bottle of bourbon somewhere. I'll bring it over and give it to you.
No,
but,
I bought
I'll
some.
be really good at this point.
But it probably also deteriorates, but much more slowly. Right. And I'm not sure that unless you're a real aficionado, you probably could tell the difference of a bottle that's been open for a year or one that's freshly opened.
I've got some that's been open for 11 years when I first moved in. Yeah. I haven't touched it since. Mm-hmm. I don't know what's going to happen.
Well, of course,
when I die, let the kids taste it.
I mean, whiskey is aged in barrels so that the oxygen can transfer through the wood. So it may.
Okay, guys, we're at the end of it. Thank you very much, Bert. Thank you.
We've come to the end of another bottle.
Zooming in, Jim. Thank you.
If we have a real quick minute, I just wanted to ask Bert about Carboy. He mentioned earlier to get a Carboy, and I just wondered if that was the guy that does his valet parking.
Yeah, right.
I wish I had a drum right now and 2 sticks. Boom.
Okay, that's it. Thank you, guys. Don't run away.
Thanks,
We've
Zach.
got a few other things here going on.